There are players who change a game with speed, and players who change it with power. And then there are players who change it with thought, with a touch so quiet and precise that those watching sometimes had to look twice to understand what had just happened. Juan Carlos Valerón was one of those players. A midfielder from a small fishing town on the island of Gran Canaria, he spent his career moving through football with a kind of unhurried grace that made the game look almost effortless. He was admired across Spain, not only for what he could do with a football, but for who he was as a person. Gentle, humble, and generous in spirit. A player who earned respect from teammates, opponents, and supporters alike. This is his story, told slowly and told gently. There is no hurry here. Let it carry you somewhere quiet. The island of Gran Canaria sits in the Atlantic Ocean, just off the northwest coast of Africa. Though it belongs to Spain, it is a warm place, volcanic in origin, shaped over millions of years into something that feels both rugged and soft at the same time. The interior of the island rises into mountains and ancient pine forests, while the coastlines open into long stretches of ocean, wind, and pale sand. It is the kind of place where the pace of life moves a little more slowly than on the mainland, where mornings are warm and unhurried, and evenings fade gently into the sound of the sea. Arguineguin is a small town on the southern coast of Gran Canaria. It is a quiet place, a fishing village, modest and unassuming, the kind of town where most people know each other, where children play in the streets, and where the ocean is never far away. The smell of salt in the air, the sound of fishing boats in the morning, the light falling warm and steady across the rooftops. This is where Juan Carlos Valerón Santana was born on the 17th of June, 1975. He grew up in Arguineguin, surrounded by the ordinary rhythms of a small Canarian community. Football was part of the fabric of life on the island, as it was throughout Spain. Children played wherever they could find space, on patches of ground, in courtyards, on any flat surface that would hold a ball. Valeron was among them. A quiet boy, by many accounts, but observant. The kind of child who watches the world carefully before deciding how to move through it. The Canary Islands have their own football tradition. The islands have always produced technically gifted players, men who learn the game in tight spaces and carried that ability to control and to think throughout their careers. Valeron would come to embody that tradition, but in those early years in Arguineguin, none of that was certain. He was simply a boy who loved football, who spent his free hours with a ball at his feet, learning by playing. As he grew older, and his ability became clearer, he moved into the youth structures of football on the island. The Canary Islands had clubs, youth teams, pathways for young players to develop. Valeron moved through those pathways with the quiet consistency that would later define his professional career. He was not the loudest or the most physically imposing player. He was the one who seemed to always be in the right place, who seemed to understand the game at a deeper level than many of those around him. The island of Gran Canaria has a professional football club, Unión Deportiva Las Palmas, commonly known simply as Las Palmas. The club is based in the island's capital city, also called Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, a large and busy port city on the northeastern coast of the island. Las Palmas had a history in Spanish football, stretching back decades, and for a young player from the south of the island, earning a place in their setup was a significant step. Valeron came through into the Las Palmas system as a teenager and began to develop as a professional footballer. The city of Las Palmas is different from Arguineguin. It is urban, busy, full of noise and movement. But Valeron seems to have carried the calm of his small hometown with him wherever he went. Those who worked with him at Las Palmas in those years remember a young man who was serious about his football, who trained with focus, who was respectful toward coaches and teammates, and who never seemed to draw unnecessary attention to himself. He made his professional debut in the lower divisions of Spanish football, before earning his place in the first team as Las Palmas competed in La Liga, the top division of Spanish football. Playing in La Liga for a club from the Canary Islands is not easy. Traveling to the mainland for away matches means long journeys across the ocean. The geography alone creates challenges that clubs from other parts of Spain do not face. But Las Palmas had a proud history in the top division, and Valeron was part of a team trying to hold its place in that competitive environment. His style of play was beginning to take shape in those years. Valeron was a central midfielder, or sometimes an attacking midfielder, a player who functioned in the spaces between defense and attack. He was not particularly quick in a straight line. He did not rely on pace to beat opponents. Instead, he moved with a kind of deceptive ease, drifting into positions where he could receive the ball and then, with a touch or a turn or a small shift of weight, create something that had not existed a moment before. He could find a pass through spaces that other players could not see. He could slow the game down or speed it up, and he seemed to do both without visible effort. There is a word in Spanish football for a certain kind of midfielder. The word is media punta, meaning roughly a player who sits between the midfield and the forward line, a creative link between the two. Valeron played something like that role, though he was never easily defined by a single label. He was simply someone who made football work better when he was on the pitch. As the 1990s progressed, Valeron's reputation grew. Spanish football scouts and coaches took note of what he was doing at Las Palmas. He was the kind of player that other professionals respected. Even when playing against him, there is something about a player who is genuinely gifted without arrogance that earns a particular kind of admiration in football. Valeron had that quality. He was skilled, clearly skilled, but he wore it lightly. In 1996, he made the move from Las Palmas to Real Club Deportivo Mallorca, a club based on another Spanish island, the Balearic island of Mallorca, in the Mediterranean. Mallorca was a club with ambitions in La Liga, a club that was building something. Moving there was a step forward for Valeron, a chance to test himself at a higher level, in a more demanding environment, against better opposition. Mallorca sits in the Mediterranean, and like Gran Canaria, it carries a certain quality of light and warmth that feels distinct from the mainland. Valeron, coming from one island to another, may have felt something familiar in that landscape. The Mediterranean light, the coastal air, the particular rhythm of life in a place surrounded by water. Whether any of that mattered to him, one cannot say with certainty, but it is pleasant to imagine that the transition felt a little like home. At Mallorca, Valeron continued to develop. He played in La Liga against the best teams in Spain, and he held his own. Not just held his own, but distinguished himself. The club went through a period of genuine quality in the late 1990s, and Valeron was part of that. He played his football with the same measured grace that had marked him at Las Palmas, and the stage at Mallorca allowed more people to see what he could do. During this time, the Spanish national team also took notice. Valeron would go on to earn caps for Spain, becoming part of a national team that was rich in midfield talent during that era. Playing for Spain meant competing alongside some of the finest players in European football, and being selected placed Valeron among the very best of his generation in his country. He wore the shirt with the same quiet pride with which he approached everything else in his career. In 1998, Valeron moved to Atletico Madrid, one of the great clubs of Spanish football. Atletico is based in the capital, a club with deep roots and passionate supporters, a club that has always carried a strong identity. Moving to Atletico was another step up in scale and profile. The Vicente Calderón Stadium, where Atletico played in those years, held tens of thousands of supporters and sat beside the Manzanares River in the south of the city. Playing there was a different experience from anything Valeron had known on the island. His time at Atletico was not uncomplicated. The club was going through a difficult period. Spanish football is enormously competitive, and Atletico at that time was navigating the kinds of institutional pressures and changes that large clubs sometimes face. Valeron played his football with the same professionalism and care that he always had, but the environment around him was unsettled. He was not always able to produce his best football in those conditions. It is worth pausing here, in the quiet rhythm of this story, to say something about what it is like to be a sensitive, thoughtful person in a turbulent environment. Valeron was never described as someone who caused controversy, who complained publicly, who made the situation about himself. He worked. He trained. He respected his teammates and his coaches. Whatever the difficulties of those years at Atletico, he moved through them with the kind of dignity that some people seem to carry naturally. And then, in the year 2000, something changed. Something that would define the central chapter of his career and his life. Valeron moved to Deportivo de La Coruña. The full name of the club is Real Club Deportivo de La Coruña, and it is based in A Coruña, a city on the northwestern tip of Spain, in the region of Galicia. Galicia is unlike the sun-warmed islands Valeron had known. It is green and cool, a land of rain and mist and ancient stone, of wide estuaries and grey Atlantic coastlines. The light in Galicia is softer and more diffuse than in the south or on the islands. The weather comes in from the ocean and sits over the land for days at a time. A Coruña is a beautiful city, built on a peninsula, surrounded on three sides by the sea. There is a lighthouse there, the Torre de Hercules, said to be the oldest working lighthouse in the world, standing on the northern headland of the city. On a clear evening, you can see it from much of the city, a steady, fixed light above the dark water of the Atlantic. It is a calm and proud city, with a strong sense of its own identity, deeply attached to the rhythms of the sea and the land. Deportivo de La Coruña, in the year 2000, was one of the most exciting football clubs in Europe. They had won the Spanish league title, the La Liga Championship, in the 1999 to 2000 season. Only the second club outside of Real Madrid and Barcelona to win the title in many years. That achievement was extraordinary, a testament to the vision of their coach, Javier Irureta, and the quality of the players he had assembled. They had a squad full of talent, a team that played with confidence and technical quality, and they were about to enter a period that would take them to the highest stages of European football. When Valeron arrived in A Coruña, he joined a team that suited him perfectly. Deportivo played football with intelligence and precision. They were not a club that tried to overpower opponents. They tried to outthink them, to move the ball carefully and creatively, to exploit space with cleverness rather than force. Valeron was exactly the kind of player that system needed. He slotted into the Deportivo midfield and almost immediately seemed like he had always been there. The stadium where Deportivo played is called the Estadio de Riazor, and it sits close to the ocean in A Coruña, separated from the beach by little more than a road and a strip of sand. On match nights, when the lights were on and the crowd was in full voice, it was one of the most atmospheric grounds in Spain. The sound of the Atlantic was never far away. The air coming in from the sea was cool and clean. It was a place that felt alive in a particular way. Valeron settled into life in Galicia and into life at Deportivo. He trained with focus and care. He was a good teammate, the kind of player others appreciated, not just for his ability, but for his presence. He was calm in the dressing room, not someone who sought the spotlight or drew attention through conflict or drama. He did his work. He played his football, and he made the people around him better. Deportivo's squad at that time contained players of real quality. Roy Mackay, the Dutch striker, was one of the most clinical finishers in European football during those years. Diego Tristan, a Spanish forward, was fast and skillful and able to score goals of considerable quality. Mauro Silva, the Brazilian midfielder, provided steel and discipline in the middle of the pitch. Nuruddin Nabet brought experience and calm to the defence. These were serious players, professionals at the top of their game, and they formed, together with Valeron and others, a team of genuine European standing. Valeron's role in the team was to connect, to link the deeper players with the forwards, to receive the ball in tight spaces, and find the pass that opened things up. He did this with a consistency that was remarkable. There is a particular pleasure in watching a player who makes the difficult look routine, who receives a ball under pressure, and emerges from that pressure with control and purpose. Valeron did this game after game, week after week, in a way that became one of the rhythms of the team. The Champions League campaign of the 2003 to 2004 season would become the most talked about chapter in Deportivo's European history. But before arriving at that remarkable story, it is worth dwelling on the years leading up to it, the steady accumulation of experience that brought Deportivo to that moment. In the 2001 to 2002 season, Deportivo reached the semi-finals of the Champions League. It was an extraordinary achievement for a club of their size and resources. They had moved through some of the best clubs in Europe to reach that stage. Valeron was part of that campaign, playing his football in the great stadiums of the continent, in the white light of European night, against defenders and midfielders who were among the finest in the world. He played with the same measured composure he always had. He did not seem overawed. He seemed, if anything, to feel that the larger stage was simply a larger space in which to do the same thing he had always done. They were ultimately eliminated in the semi-finals, but the run had confirmed something. Deportivo were not just a story of one domestic title. They were a genuine force in European football, and they had players capable of competing at the very highest level. Valeron was one of those players. In the seasons that followed, Deportivo maintained their presence in the upper reaches of Spanish football and continued to participate in European competition. There were injuries and changes in the squad, as there always are in professional football, but the core of the team held together, and Valeron remained central to how the club played. And then came the 2003 to 2004 Champions League. Deportivo moved through the group stage and into the knockout rounds. In the quarter-finals, they were drawn against Juventus, the great Italian club, one of the most formidable teams in European football at that time. The first leg in Italy was difficult. Deportivo lost. But in the second leg at the Riazor, close to the ocean, under those lights, they won. And they went through. That set up a meeting with AC Milan in the semi-finals. AC Milan, in the 2003 to 2004 season, were considered by most observers to be among the best clubs in the world. They had won the Champions League the previous season. Their squad was full of players of the highest quality. Kaká, Andriy Shevchenko, Clarence Seedorf, Paolo Maldini. They were experienced, technically exceptional, and formidable in every way. The first leg was played in Milan at the San Siro. one of the great football stadiums in the world. Deportivo lost by 4-1. It was a heavy defeat. By every reasonable measure, they were out of the competition. No team in Champions League history had ever come back from a 3-goal or greater deficit at that stage. What happened in the second leg at the Riazor has become one of the most discussed results in the history of the competition. Deportivo won by 4-0. They went through on aggregate. The goals came in a manner that was, for those watching, extraordinary. Albert Luque scored early. Fran added another. Walter Pandiani scored twice. The crowd at the Riazor were in a state of disbelief and then wonder. Even the players on the pitch seemed to move through the match in a kind of focused, calm, collective effort, as though they believed in what was happening, even as the scale of it grew. Valeron was part of that night. He played his football with the composure that defined him. He had not scored the goals, but he was there, in the midfield, connecting, moving, playing his part in the fabric of a performance that defied expectation. This is, in many ways, the truest picture of who Valeron was as a footballer. Not always the name on the score sheet, but present, essential, part of the machinery of something remarkable. Deportivo would go on to face Porto in the final of that Champions League, a final they did not reach because Porto won the other semi-final. But the journey there, and particularly that night against Milan, remained in the memory of those who witnessed it. Let us pause here, in the gentleness of this story, and simply sit with the image of A Coruña on that evening, the stadium by the sea, the lights against the night sky, the Atlantic nearby, as always, steady and untroubled, and a team of footballers from a small city in northwest Spain, producing something that no one expected, not because they were louder or more forceful than anyone else, but because they believed in the way they played, and they played it with everything they had. Throughout all of this, Valeron's personal journey was not without its own quiet difficulties. Injuries, as they do with many footballers, became a recurring part of his story. Knee injuries, in particular, troubled him during the middle years of his career. These were not small knocks or brief interruptions. Some of his injuries required surgery and long periods of rehabilitation. Months away from football, months of careful, patient work to recover the ability to do what had always come so naturally. Rehabilitation from a serious knee injury is a slow and often invisible process. There are no crowds watching when a footballer is alone in a physiotherapy room, working through exercises designed to gradually return strength and mobility to a damaged joint. There are no headlines when a player takes their first tentative steps back onto a training pitch after months away. The process is quiet and demanding and requires a particular kind of patience. Valeron had that patience. Those who were around him during his recoveries speak of his determination and his calmness. He did not rage against the injuries or publicly despair. He worked. He trusted the process. He came back. And when he came back, he played with the same quality and the same character that had always defined him. There is something important in that, something worth holding on to for a moment. The ability to face a long period of difficulty with steadiness and patience, to work without the reward of immediate results, to trust that the effort will eventually lead somewhere. It is a quality that appears in other parts of life too, not just in football, not just in sport. It is simply a way of moving through difficult time with dignity. Valeron returned from his injuries more than once. He came back to the Deportivo midfield, to the familiar rhythms of the Riazor, to the city by the sea. His teammates were glad to have him back. The supporters of Deportivo, who had adopted him as one of their own with real warmth, welcomed his returns with quiet joy. The supporters of Deportivo de La Coruña have a particular character. Galicians, the people of that northwestern corner of Spain, are often described as warm but also private, proud of their region and their culture, not given to extravagant displays, but deeply loyal in their attachment. Valeron seems to have fit naturally into that culture. He was not a showman. He did not seek publicity or manufacture moments for the cameras. He was a professional who loved his club and his football, and who behaved with decency toward everyone around him. The people of A Coruña responded to that with real affection. Stories of his sportsmanship and kindness are easy to find in the memories of those who played with him or against him. Former teammates often spoke about how Valeron treated everyone the same way, with patience, kindness, and quiet respect, whether they were star players or young academy footballers. Opponents in La Liga and the Champions League also described a player who competed honestly, never harshly, and who would often help an opponent back to their feet after a challenge. It was this quiet sense of fairness and humility that made him widely respected throughout Spanish football. There is a word sometimes used in Spanish about people like Valeron, caballero. It means gentleman, not in an old-fashioned or stuffy sense, but in the sense of someone who moves through life with integrity and consideration for others. It is a word that comes up in accounts of Valeron's career and character, and it fits. Valeron spent many years at Deportivo de La Coruña. It became the club most associated with his career, the place most closely tied to his identity as a footballer. He was there through the great years, the Champions League campaigns, the high nights at the Riesa. He was there through the injuries, the long recoveries, the patient returns. He was there as the club's situation changed over time, as the extraordinary squad of those early years gradually dispersed, as the financial landscape of Spanish football shifted, as the era that had made Deportivo one of Europe's finest clubs slowly came to a close. Through all of that, he stayed. He was loyal to the club, and the club was loyal to him. In a world where footballers move frequently, and contracts are broken and renegotiated, and moved on from without much sentiment, Valeron's long attachment to Deportivo was something that supporters noticed and valued. It felt like love, the kind that stays when things are difficult, not only when they are easy. As the years passed and Valeron moved through his 30s, his playing time changed. He was no longer always the first name on the team sheet. His body, after everything it had been through, required more management than it once had. But when he played, even in those later years, the quality was still there. The calmness, the intelligence, the ability to find the right pass in the right moment. These things do not vanish overnight. They are built over decades of understanding the game, and they persist. There were younger players in the Deportivo squad who trained alongside Valeron in those years, and who later spoke about what they learned simply by watching him, how he moved, how he made decisions, how he prepared before matches, and how he conducted himself after them, in victory and in defeat. He did not lecture or demand. He simply did things in a certain way, and those around him paid attention. His experience with the Spanish national team had also added layers to his understanding of the game. Playing for Spain during those years meant playing alongside exceptional midfielders, players like Raúl, Gaisca Mendieta, and others who had their own gifts and their own ways of seeing the game. Being part of that environment, competing for a place in the squad, learning from the best available to the country, all of it deepened Valeron's football understanding. He never had the simplest path to the national team. Spain during his era was blessed with midfield talent. and competition for places was intense. Valeron was not always the automatic choice, but he was valued, and his qualities were respected. When he played for Spain, he played in the same way he always played, without pretension, without excess, with precision and care. Let us rest in the story for a moment and come back to the landscape, Gran Canaria, where it all began. The southern coast, the fishing town, the Atlantic warm and wide. A boy with a ball on a patch of ground near the sea. The sound of the ocean in the background, the smell of salt in the warm air, the light falling heavy and gold in the late afternoon. He did not know then what was ahead of him. The stadiums of Europe, the nights at the Riaza, the long recoveries, the quiet pride of a career built on honesty and craft. He was simply a boy playing football. There is something quietly wonderful in that. In 2013, after more than a decade at Deportivo, Valeron made a return to the club of his origins. He went back to Unión Deportiva Las Palmas, the club of Gran Canaria, the club where his professional journey had begun. Las Palmas at that point were competing in the Segunda Division, the second tier of Spanish football, working to return to La Liga after a period of absence from the top flight. Coming home is not always straightforward. Returning to a place after a long time away can feel different from how one imagined it. But Valeron's return to Las Palmas seems to have been something genuinely felt. The island of Gran Canaria, the Atlantic light, the familiar rhythms of a place where he was known not just as a footballer, but as a person. He was welcomed back with warmth by supporters who remembered what he had been and who were glad to have him return. He was no longer the player who had left for Mallorca in 1996, of course. He was a man in his late 30s now, carrying the accumulated experience of more than 20 years in professional football. His legs were not as they had been. The injuries had taken something from him, as injuries always do. But his mind was as clear as ever. His understanding of the game, as sharp as it had always been, and in the context of the second division, a player of his quality and intelligence could still contribute meaningfully. Las Palmas were building toward promotion. The club had a sense of purpose and momentum in those years. Valeron was part of that project, a senior figure whose presence gave the squad something that could not be easily quantified. His experience, his calmness, his way of handling the rhythms of a long season. These things mattered. In the 2015 to 2016 season, Las Palmas won promotion to La Liga. It was a significant moment for the club, a return to the top flight of Spanish football after many years away. For Valeron, playing a part in that achievement, back on the island where he had grown up, surrounded by supporters who knew him and loved him, was a particular kind of completion. The story had a shape to it, not a dramatic shape, not a Hollywood shape, but the quiet, satisfying shape of a life in football that had moved in a full circle. He played in La Liga with Las Palmas after the promotion. He was now in his 40s, extraordinary by the standards of most professional careers, but in the context of a player who had always used his mind more than his body, who had always conserved energy through intelligence rather than burning it through speed. It made a kind of sense. He was not playing full matches every week. He was contributing when needed, providing craft and experience and the particular quality that only comes from decades of doing something. The supporters at the Estadio de Gran Canaria, the home ground of Las Palmas, welcomed him with a warmth that was easy to feel. He was one of them, from the island, from the south coast, from a small fishing town by the Atlantic. He had gone out into the world and done remarkable things with quiet dignity. And now he was back, still playing, still contributing, still the same person who had always moved through football without unnecessary noise or drama. His final years in professional football were a kind of gentle winding down. The matches became less frequent. The role changed. He moved from active participant to a figure who offered counsel and presence as much as performance. But he was still there, still part of the professional game, still training, still working with the focus that had always defined him. When Valeron finally retired from professional football, it was without great fanfare. There was no elaborate farewell tour, no sequence of emotional ceremonies designed for the cameras. He had simply been a footballer for a very long time, and now he was no longer going to be a footballer. The transition was made in the same spirit in which he had always done things, quietly, with dignity, without unnecessary performance. In the years since his retirement, he has remained connected to football, as many former players do. He has worked in coaching and development roles, passing on what he learned to younger generations of players. The qualities that made him admired as a player, his calmness, his patience, his respect for others, seem well suited to the work of developing young footballers, of helping them find their own way through the game. In Gran Canaria, he is remembered with particular affection. The island's connection to Spanish football has always been strong, and Valeron is among the most decorated and admired footballers the island has produced. But it is not only his achievements that are remembered, it is the way he went about things, the character he showed throughout his career. The fact that through all the years in the spotlight, through the great nights in Europe, and the painful months of injury recovery, he remained recognizably the same person. It is worth asking, in the quietness of this story, what it is about certain athletes that makes them endure in the memory in a particular way. There are players with more trophies, players with more goals, players who occupied larger spaces in the headlines, but Valeron, in the accounts of those who saw him play, or who worked alongside him, occupies a specific kind of place. He is remembered with warmth, with something close to fondness. People speak of watching him with the sense that they were seeing something genuine, something unforced. There is a quality in football, in sport more generally, that is hard to name, but easy to feel. It is the quality of a player who is fully themselves, who plays in a way that is not performed or constructed, but simply is what it is. Some athletes seem to become a kind of character, a persona separate from the person, shaped by expectation and publicity and the pressures of professional sport. Valeron never seemed to do that. He was always simply himself. Perhaps that came from growing up in a small town on a small island, far from the centers of football in Madrid and Barcelona. Perhaps it came from the particular character of the Canary Islands, where the rhythms of life are a little slower and the distance from mainland Spanish culture a little larger. Perhaps it was simply who he was, something fundamental in his personality that no amount of professional football could alter. He spent many seasons at Deportivo La Coruña. He felt the rain and the mist of Galicia. He played in the light of the Riazor on those European nights. He felt the particular quality of the support of the people of A Coruña, quiet and loyal and deeply felt. He became, over those years, genuinely part of the fabric of the club and the city. When he eventually left, the gratitude was real. When he returned to play against Deportivo in later years, the reception he received from the supporters was warm. They remembered him as one of their own. That kind of memory does not come from statistics or trophies alone. It comes from the sense that someone gave themselves honestly to a place and a community, and that the place felt it. In A Coruña, on a cool evening, with the lighthouse sending its slow pulse of light across the water. It is easy to imagine the years when Valeron played at the Riesa, the crowd finding their seats, the lights coming on above the pitch, the sound of the Atlantic somewhere beyond the stadium walls, and in the midfield, moving without urgency, finding the space, receiving the ball and releasing it with that particular, unhurried precision. The player from Arguineguin, the boy from the south coast of Gran Canaria, now a man at the centre of one of football's most elegant teams. Those who were there remember it. Those who were not there can find the footage, though footage can only give a partial sense of what it was like to watch him live, to feel the rhythm of a team when someone like that is in it. The intelligence was visible on the screen, certainly. But the fuller experience, the sense of watching someone who made the game look simpler and more beautiful than it usually is, that was something felt in the body, in the way that live sport is felt. Valeron belonged to a particular generation of Spanish football, a generation that produced players of exceptional technical quality. Spain went on to become the dominant international team in the world in the late 2000s and early 2010s, winning the European Championship in 2008 and 2012, and the World Cup in 2010. The technical foundation for that era was being built in the years when Valeron was at his peak. He was part of that larger story, one of the players who demonstrated what was possible when Spanish football committed fully to technical excellence and intelligent collective play. He was not always the central figure in the Spain squad. There were times when his club form and his fitness were not sufficient to put him ahead of other options. There were competitions where he might have expected to play more and did not, but he was always professional in how he handled those situations, never becoming bitter or difficult, simply continuing to work and to be available. This is, when you consider it, a particular kind of grace. Professional sport creates many situations where it is tempting to respond with resentment or self-pity. When you are injured and watching others play the game you love, when you are fit but not selected and must sit in the stands while younger or differently regarded players take the field, when you reach the end of your career and must accept that the body can no longer do what the mind still wants it to do. These moments are tests of character, and they are tests that are largely invisible to the public. Valeron passed those tests without apparent difficulty, not because he was free of emotion or did not feel the frustrations of a competitive career, but because he seems to have had a fundamental acceptance of the realities of his profession, a settled understanding of what he could control and what he could not, and a commitment to doing the things within his control as well as he possibly could. That quality, that kind of quiet, emotional steadiness, is perhaps the thing that makes his story suitable for a moment like this one. A quiet evening, a comfortable place, a mind beginning to soften towards sleep. There is something in the rhythm of his career, the steady movement forward through difficulty and achievement, the calm presence maintained in turbulent circumstances, the long loyalty to the places and people that mattered to him, that resonates with something deeper than football. He was simply a person who loved something and did it for a very long time, with care and integrity and a genuine gentleness toward the world around him. He played in small towns on islands in the Atlantic. He played in great stadiums in the capitals of Europe. He played against players who were considered among the very finest of their time. And through all of it, he remained the same. The ball would come to him in the midfield. He would take it. And for a fraction of a second, the game would seem to pause. Not because anything dramatic was happening, but because in that fraction of a second, he was looking, reading, understanding the space ahead of him. And then he would move it on, precisely, to exactly where it needed to go. And the game would continue. and the crowd would breathe, and the match would flow a little better than it had been flowing before. That is the image that remains. Not the spectacular, not the thunderous. The quiet, intelligent, precise transfer of a ball from one place to another, and the ripple of possibility that followed. There is a particular pleasure in thinking about the quieter moments of a footballer's career. Not the goals or the trophies, not the nights in the great European stadiums with tens of thousands of people watching, but the ordinary days, the training ground in the morning, when the dew is still on the grass, the drive to the stadium before a home match, the city still going about its business, the world indifferent to what is about to happen inside the ground, the moment in the dressing room before a game, when everything is still possible and nothing has yet been decided. Valeron would have known all of those moments thousands of times across his career. The same small rituals, repeated season after season, in different places and with different teammates, but always with the same underlying rhythm. The preparation, the performance, the recovery, the preparation again. Professional football, when it is going well, has a quality of absorption. When you are fit and playing regularly, and the team is functioning and the results are good, the rhythm of a season can carry you through the weeks in a state of focused, purposeful effort. There is always the next match to prepare for, always something to work on, always a reason to be out on the training pitch, finding the small adjustments that might make a difference. Valeron, by all accounts, was someone who found real meaning in that rhythm. He was not a player who seemed to regard training as a necessary inconvenience on the way to match day. He trained with genuine attention, with the focus of someone who understood that the quality you produce on Saturday is built across the hours of the week before it. In Galicia, the training ground would often have been under a grey sky, with the particular wet mist that rolls in off the Atlantic in the autumn and winter months. The grass would be heavy with moisture. The sound of boots on wet turf is a particular sound, soft and dense. The players moving across the pitch, going through drills, working on patterns of play, their breath visible in the cool air. It is one of the quieter images of professional football, far from the noise of the stadium, and it is where most of the actual work is done. Valeron, in those training sessions, would have been working on the things that defined him: the quick control, the half-turn that opens up a passing angle, the weight of a pass that allows the receiver to keep moving without breaking stride. These are small technical details, but at the level he was playing, they are the details that separate the good from the exceptional, and they require repetition, patient, careful repetition, day after day, until they become not something you have to think about, but simply something you do. There is a meditative quality to that kind of repetitive technical work. The same movement, done again and again, each time a little more precise, a little more fluent. It asks for patience and presence, a willingness to stay with the small task in front of you, rather than reaching ahead to the larger picture. Valeron seems to have had that quality in abundance. The patience to work on the details, the presence to be fully engaged with what was directly in front of him. This is one of the reasons, perhaps, that watching him play had a particular quality of calm. He was not a player who seemed to be fighting against the game, forcing it to yield results. He seemed to be moving with the game, responding to it as it developed, letting his understanding and his training guide his movements. It is the quality that the best artists have in any discipline. The preparation has been so thorough, so deeply absorbed, that in the moment of performance, the preparation becomes invisible, and only the expression remains. When he was injured, the absence of that daily rhythm must have been acutely felt. The training ground where you cannot train. The pitch you can only watch from a distance, while others do the work you want to be doing. The physiology of serious knee injury means that the initial phases of recovery involve very little movement at all. Rest, controlled exercises, gradual, almost invisible progress, measured in tiny increments. Weeks passing before anything feels meaningfully different. Valeron went through this more than once. The patience required is the same patience that he applied to his technical training, but directed at something slower, more frustrating, less under his control. You cannot make a knee heal faster by trying harder. The tissue and the structures repair on their own schedule, and the footballer's only task is to support that process and not to impede it. The support he had from Deportivo during his injury periods was important to him. A club that trusts a player through long periods of absence, that maintains its commitment and continues to plan around the player's return, provides something essential that is more than financial or contractual. It is a statement of belief. You matter here, not just when you are performing, but also when you are absent. That kind of trust creates loyalty in return, and it helps to explain why Valeron stayed at Deportivo for as long as he did, even through the difficult years when the club's fortunes were not what they had been. Football has a way of testing the bonds between clubs and players. When things are going well, loyalty is easy. When a club is struggling financially or the results have been poor, when younger players are being brought in and older ones are being asked to accept reduced roles, the bonds are tested. Valeron's loyalty to Deportivo through those changing circumstances said something real about his character and about the relationship he had built with the club. He was not simply waiting out his time in those later years at Deportivo. He was still working, still contributing when he could, still providing the kind of presence that a dressing room needs. The experience of someone who has been through great nights and difficult periods, who knows the rhythms of a long professional career, who can speak to younger players from a place of genuine understanding. These contributions are less visible than goals and assists, but they are real. When former Deportivo players speak about that squad from the great years, they tend to mention the spirit of the group, the sense that there was something beyond talent holding them together, a collective character that made the team more than the sum of its parts. Valeron was part of creating and sustaining that character, not through speeches or dramatic gestures, but through consistent example. The way he trained, the way he conducted himself, the way he treated the people around him. The city of La Coruña itself is worth dwelling on for another moment. It is not a city that seeks attention. It is not Madrid or Barcelona or Seville, not a city that occupies the center of the national imagination. It is a city at the edge of the country, facing the Atlantic, proud of its Galician identity, going about its life with a kind of self-contained dignity. The people of the city identify strongly with Deportivo, not because football is the only thing that matters to them, but because in the context of a large and competitive football country, having a club that competes at the highest level gives a particular shape to local pride. When Deportivo were at their best, when they were winning the league and reaching the semi-finals and then the quarter-finals of the Champions League, the city felt it, not in a chaotic or overwhelming way, but in the steady, warm way of a community, recognizing that something genuinely good is happening. That is worth remembering. It is not always the biggest or the loudest stories that matter most. Sometimes it is the story of a small city by the sea, with a football team that believed in themselves, with a gentle midfielder from the islands at the heart of it. Valeron and places like La Coruña seem made for each other in some ways. Both have a certain quality of not being interested in performance for its own sake. La Coruña is not a city that dresses itself up for visitors. Valeron was not a player who dressed himself up for the cameras. There was an honesty about both, a preference for the genuine over the spectacular, that perhaps made the connection between the player and the place a natural one. And Las Palmas, too, the island city, where his story began and where it eventually returned. La Coruña and Las Palmas are very different places. One is green and cool and faces the grey Atlantic. The other is warm and golden and open to the blue South Atlantic that stretches toward Africa. But they share something. They are both cities at the edges, not at the centres. They are both places where football means something, where the local club is a genuine focus of community feeling, where the departure of a favourite player is a loss that is personally felt, and the return of one is a quiet celebration. When Valeron came back to Las Palmas and then helped them reach La Liga again, the people of the island understood what that meant, not just as a football achievement, but as the completion of something. A player who had gone out into the wider world, who had done remarkable things in the service of another club in another part of Spain, who had been loyal and honest and generous throughout his career, coming home and helping the team of his island return to the highest level. It is a simple story, but it is a good one. It is getting late now, and the story is reaching its natural resting place. Outside, wherever you are, the evening has settled into its quietest phase. The sounds that belong to the day have faded. What remains is the softer background of the world at rest. In Arguineguin, on the southern coast of Gran Canaria, the Atlantic is steady. The small town goes about its life. The fishing boats are out, or they are in. The streets are quiet in the late hour. The light over the ocean is deep and calm. It is the place where Juan Carlos Valerón began, where the story first started to take shape, in the unhurried rhythms of a coastal community on an island far out in the warm Atlantic. From there, he went to Las Palmas, to Mallorca, to Madrid, to A Coruña. He played football in the great arenas of Europe. He came back, in the end, to where he began, to the island, to the familiar landscape of his childhood. And when his career was over, the game went on, as it always does, and his name settled into the category of players who are remembered with real warmth by those who saw them play. Calm and gentle and precise. A playmaker. A gentleman. From the island. Let the rest of the evening be quiet. Let the thoughts soften and the breath slow. Let the image of a midfielder moving through a sunlit training ground be the last thing the mind rests on before sleep comes in, steady and unhurried, the way the best things always do.